Welcome to the Ailm Practice Education Series in partnership with Firm Media, delivering concise and impactful insights for aesthetic and specialty medical practices. Your host, Chris Solhonik.
Today we have a very special guest, Michael Byrd. Michael, welcome to the show. I know we've known each other for a little bit, but I think today we're going to have some conversations that you and I don't usually get to have, so I'm really looking forward to it. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and how you ended up where you are today?
Sure. Well, first, thanks for having me on. I'm excited to be a part of this, and I think it's going to be a great success. So I'm a business and healthcare attorney with one of the founders of the law firm Byrd, and a little bit of my background is I stumbled into law school because I didn't know what I was going to do as a young college kid and didn't have a job. And my father, who's a plastic surgeon, kept encouraging me. And so I thought I'll go to law school, but I'm not going to be a lawyer. Then I'll go into business somewhere. Thankfully, I figured out that that's what I was supposed to be doing, was to be an attorney when I was in law school. It took me about halfway through into my second year and it clicked. And so I went to go work for a firm. And as a business and healthcare attorney now, that's not what my original job was, nor my vision for myself. I didn't even know what healthcare law was. My father and his practice back in the mid 90s, this was the peak of the doctors hate lawyers era. There was pre-tort reform. And so all the lawyers are going to take practices away. Fears were prevalent. And it worked to my advantage in the sense that my father and his partners kept hiring me to do work for them, even though I had no idea what I was doing, because they trusted me not to screw them over because I was one of them.
Sure.
So, I realized pretty quickly that there really weren't other lawyers doing healthcare, at least in particular, working for doctors. If there were healthcare attorneys, they were doing hospital work and, big insurance. So I just started gathering an interest in it, started learning it and doing good work. And so that blossomed. It really kind of exploded and became, my passion and what I do when my now partner, Brad Adato, was doing the same thing, and he was displaced by Katrina in 2005, and we were introduced and realized that we both did the same thing and decided to join together when he moved to Dallas and really focus our practice on working with physicians and other healthcare providers. And I couldn't have dreamed that we would one day have our own firm and have a national presence, but it's been a fun ride.
Sure. I have a little bit of a similar story. I was in the music business for about 10 years, and then the internet came along and Napster I was getting funding from the major labels. And when Napster came along, the major labels stopped giving funding to the little guys. And then I realized it was time for me to go get a job. And I had some people that I knew that had purchased the domain names cosmeticsurgery.com and plasticsurgery.com. And I think that's where loosely, it's funny because when someone introduced us via email a while back, as soon as I saw your last name, I reached out and asked if your dad was a plastic surgeon, your father was a plastic surgeon. I think my initial connection with him was that he was listed on those directories when .coms were a thing way back in the day.
Yeah, my last name has provided a lot of tailwinds to my career, especially early on when no one knew who I was, and I was given respect just because I had the same last name and they thought so highly of my dad. The coolest part of it, though, by far, is that, my brother and sister would say the same thing. I mean, my dad was just my dad at home, and I've gotten a really insight into his professional world and how he's viewed by his peers and gotten to work with him for, 30 years. And so it's been, that part was unexpected and has been the best part.
Sure. And he is well respected. Anytime your name comes up or his, I think I was having lunch with you one day and I got a text from Dr. Michael Deckard in San Antonio. And he said, tell Michael I said hi. I really respect his father. Those two things go hand in hand, the respect for your father and
yeah.
And that.
That's
so
cool.
I'm super glad you're on the show. I'm really looking forward to this. You and I don't get to have conversations like this, so I hope that our listeners are equally as excited about it. The format for the show is I ask 3 questions. You already know what those questions are. They're literally designed to help us drill down into what you do and how you help practices. And then once we sort of explore those answers to those questions and a little bit about what you're doing with AmSpa, the last thing is I'm going to ask you for your Ailm Essential Insight and just something you can leave our listeners with that might help them solve a problem that they have in their practice. And then we're out. So you ready to get started?
Let's do it.
Okay. So question number 1, what key legal considerations should med spa owners be aware of when setting up or expanding their business?
So I'm going to break this up, if it's okay with you, and talk about setting up and then talking about expanding, because they have a lot of overlap, but there's a kind of a different view of how you look at it, if that works.
Sure. I understand that completely.
Yeah. So for setting up, there's kind of 5 areas I'll touch on, things to be thinking about. And I'll start with not just what's most important in terms of what we do, but what's most important in terms of protecting what you're building, and that's compliance. A medical practice, a medical spa is a medical practice. A weight loss center, you name the kind of retail brand that you see, and legally speaking behind that, if they're providing medical services, it is treated just like a medical practice and has to be set up just like a medical practice. So what that means for someone starting is, we call it the 3-legged stool. You have to get 3 key areas in place to have the foundation to be able to be successful as you go forward. The first leg is what we call the ownership leg, and that is that in many states, and it is state law driven, there are regulations about who can own a medical practice. The regulations go something like this: if you're a business and you're providing medical services, you need to be owned by a doctor. Now, there's different asterisks for different states and different add-ons where others can participate, but the problem you're trying to solve is the person that's starting the med spa allowed to even own that med spa? And if not, then there's a solution that's been around longer than I've been practicing, called the Management Services Organization model, or the MSO model. But it takes you down a path on corporate structure and setup that becomes really important to us healthcare attorneys. It's super straightforward to a person that's never heard of it before. It takes some getting used to understand, conceptually what it is and why you need it, and then how to actually run it once you have it. The second leg of the stool is, the second 2 legs deal with the chain of care for patients and making sure you have the right team and the right processes in place. The second leg is the good faith exam, is what we call it, but it's really understanding that if you're a medical practice, anytime a new patient comes in the door, they need to fill out a patient history and be cleared by someone who has the scope of practice to render a diagnosis and treatment plan. And that's a doctor, a nurse practitioner, or a PA, with a few exceptions of states that might limit a PA. For the most part, NPs are going to be good across the United States. And of course, a physician is, as long as the physician has the appropriate training and what they're clearing the patient for. So, you have an ER doc that's never done anything in aesthetics, and they don't know how to do Botox, then the medical board would take issue if they were clearing a patient for Botox. The final leg is making sure there's appropriate supervision and delegation to the right people that are going to be treating the patients. And that varies by state. It can be super counterintuitive, but the bottom line is that I've seen businesses make really big mistakes by hiring people that don't have the qualifications to be, or the scope of practice to be, treating these patients in a particular state. And they're getting bad information, and then they've got a pretty big compliance problem and a pretty big staffing problem in their business that they have to solve for. So that's kind of the how to start from a compliance perspective. And then from there, I'll kind of touch on a few more areas when you're starting a med spa. One, you really want to make sure you're thinking forward on your business structure. Anyone can go and just form an LLC or form a professional entity. And as I mentioned, there may be a compliance reason you have to have a more sophisticated structure like the MSO, but there's business reasons to be thinking about where are you trying to go? What's your vision for your business for 5 years from now? And are there things I can do now that will optimize my corporate structure to get there and not get into the opposite of that, which is you're having to kind of fix things or unwind things. And there can be all sorts of operational and tax issues that go with that later if you're not set up correctly. Part of forming the business is your tax election. That's a big part of it. How are you going to be treated by the IRS? And then if you're bringing on partners, going to the business structure, a common mistake people make is they don't deal with how that relationship's going to work. It's like a marriage. It's a business marriage. And so there are a lot of things that need to be worked through about roles and responsibilities, decision making, and of course the prenup type stuff, like what happens if this doesn't work out.
Sure.
How are we going to protect the business? Then the last couple of things I'll mention in setting up a business is getting your infrastructure in place. If you're going to have employees and having all those kind of I's dotted and T's crossed. Same thing for your patient intake documents for patients and your SOPs and processes. And then finally, a big mistake I see people make, this isn't legal, but it's a important mistake that we see happen, and that's having proper accounting and bookkeeping on the front end so that you have good data, you can file good tax returns, and you have a true understanding of what's happening in your business. That's kind of it for the setup. I can touch on expanding or if we need to move on.
I think this is great. I do have a follow-up question or two on that. Talking to different consultants, often the subject of balancing. Plastic surgeon obviously probably didn't put a ton of thought into the structure of their business, marketing their business, or running their business. They're putting a lot of energy into being a plastic surgeon. A lot of plastic surgeons, and for the sake of this show, there's oral surgeons listening to it and so on and so forth. So I don't think it's mutually exclusive to plastic surgery or the aesthetic industry. But I think often I think we see, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I got out of school. I went to work for someone else. I'm now going out on my own. I hung my shingle. Over a handful of years, I got a reputation in the community. My before and afters on my website look good. I'm so busy that I don't really look at my P&Ls, and here I am moving along, right?
It's a common mistake that is super understandable. And there's one of three things. I mean, one is they don't know. I mean, they haven't gotten the training. It's getting a little better in recent years, but not, when I say a little better, you're talking about special education, not part of the curriculum of what they're learning on the business side of medicine, which would touch on legal and the business and marketing and all those things. And so there's a lack of knowledge. And so, you're, highly trained for whatever it is that you're going to be treating your patients with and not trained at all for running a business. And so you just, are going to get an expensive education along the way as you do it. If you don't get help.
100%.
The second thing is you have,
which is true for any business owner.
For sure. I totally agree. And the second thing you might have is physicians, usually when we meet with them, they're the smartest person in the room. Really. I mean, they are, and again, going back to the fact that they haven't had this training, they can know that they're that smart. They've thrived in school for many years, yet they're not subject matter experts, and they can have a false sense of confidence that they're going to be able to solve the marketing, accounting, legal issues. And then the third thing is that sometimes they actually can. They have that business knack, but they don't have the time to do it. I mean, they're trying to grow and make money by treating patients, and they have a aptitude towards business, running a business, the legal, all of that. You can sense it when you talk to them, but things fall through the cracks because they can't get to it from a time perspective.
Actually, this dovetails nicely into the expansion piece, but just a insight that I had. I think that private equity coming into the space, I also I read a statistic somewhere where there's a significant amount of older plastic surgeons moving towards, like a tipping point amount of older plastic surgeons moving towards retirement and trying to sell. And I think when you combine private equity with trying to sell, there's a market awareness that happens where some of those people had to find out that their business really wasn't worth what they thought it was, or it wasn't sellable. And that's what I think that's what's happening there is, one, you have post-COVID where everybody made a lot of money, and now they're not making as much now, but it's still more than they were, and they don't have the visibility to sort of see that. And then the other piece is just a market sophistication that comes with realizing I better get things in order if I want to sell this thing. And so people are really drilling down and hiring consultants and things like that. So are you seeing a little bit of that?
For sure. I mean, early private equity was unrealistic because there was a lot of money on the sidelines and probably undisciplined purchasing by private equity to get in the game. Set a lot of expectations amongst, my physician clients and just that world. And so I've had a lot of conversations of feeling like the gold rush, like I've got to go and get out there and do it. And then the dust started settling after those first acquisitions, and the doctors realized that private equity has the same problems that the practices have. They have to figure out how to hire and retain talent, and they didn't have a magic solution. They had to figure out how to run a plastic surgery or other type of medical practice, and there's not a magic solution. It's all hard work. And then, of course, private equity realized that there are warts on the businesses. And so what's starting to happen, or really has already happened, and we saw it a lot last year, is private equity has gotten normalized on, who they're going to target and buy from. And so that's left a lot of practices, to your point, realizing that they're not that desirable. And so then they're kind of back to, okay, where does that leave me now? Like, I had never heard of private equity, and then all of a sudden it was this magic solution, and now it's gone. And so we had a lot of conversations last year that looked more like our pre-COVID conversations, the old school, getting another doctor to transition into their practice. Yeah. You want to be eyes wide open if you're going to go down that path. But to your point, doctors are getting more wise because of these lessons and starting to hire outside consultants and getting advice on how to design an exit strategy, which kind of does dovetail to your question. What do you need to think about if you're expanding? And this applies again to whether it's a med spa or any medical practice. The first thing I ask people when they're saying they're ready to scale is, okay, well, why? I mean, what's your vision for what you're trying to do? Because a mistake we will see sometimes is growth for growth's sake without any real, idea of where they're headed and why they're headed there. And so that can be helpful as an anchor point, because growing a business is expensive and it takes a lot of cash. And that means it's either your own profits, debt, or an investor to help you get there. And those are risks that you're taking for your business. And so you want to be strategic and intentional. And then it becomes more important to keep your business sound from a compliance and structure perspective. And even if you're sound at the beginning, when you start growing it, you're putting stress on the business. And there's several areas where you can either have an inefficient business structure or a non-compliant setup. And it really feels like drifting. I mean, you just blink and all of a sudden you've got a compliance or structure problem. That has to be woven into your strategy when you're looking to grow, and make sure that you kind of have a solid plan to stay in front of it. And all the things with starting your business are still there. The stakes are higher, and the risk, in many ways can be higher because you have something that's making you want to grow. And most don't appreciate, kind of the risk that goes with staffing up and the payroll drain and cost that goes with that, or it's expensive.
Yeah. And one of the things that is, I think, commonly overlooked, in my opinion, is sometimes the staff that got you there, once you start expanding and adding a junior partner or a med spa, I mean, for me, the key word when I decided this small digital marketing agency, or we're doing X amount of clients, and now we're starting to get national exposure, and now I've gone from 10 employees to 15 to 20 to whatever. The analogy I use is basically going from mom and pop to sort of deciding I was going to be a full functioning national marketing agency. The key word for me was visibility. I needed visibility. I needed visibility on cost of goods sold, all of that stuff to know what was happening. But I had 10 years of business trying to grow it, of growing, breaking, growing, breaking, growing, breaking, where someone who just decides to add a junior partner and kind of expand, they're in the game, and it's a different animal, and lack of visibility could be super costly if you're, you know, if you're waiting till you're, oh, I haven't been profitable in 10 years. And well, I just need to make some consulting adjustments. Making consultant adjustments could mean having to get rid of 30-40% of the people that have all the institutional knowledge. That is going to be super expensive.
Yeah, you're right. And anyone that's a business owner has been in that mom and pop stage that you talk about, and we can all relate to, the school of hard knocks that goes with that. And you do have to, when you're ready to grow, it's time to go into the adulting phase of your business. And,
Yeah.
and
Anybody who thinks I'm going to hire a
you're growing.
consultant and it's not going to be expensive or painful, not just the hiring the consultant part, but like tearing it back to the studs and rebuilding it's painful.
Yeah.
I'm going to jump to question number
Yeah.
2. The med spa
Sure.
industry is evolving rapidly. What legal and compliance challenges should owners prioritize to stay ahead of the regulations?
So I'm going to hit the big 5 because these are the things that can cause that drifting I mentioned earlier. Number 1 is technology. That the law doesn't keep up with the speed of innovation, and it causes a lot of confusion about who can operate devices, whether you can operate these devices or offer them to patients. In the med spa world, you see all the weight loss wave of semaglutides and tirzepatides and whatever's to
GLP-1s.
come next. Yeah, the GLP-1, and there's a lot of new regulation introduced when you start going out of traditional medical services, because now you have pharmacy laws that are getting kicked in, a heavier dose of FDA. And so that's just one illustration. Years ago, when Cool Sculpting came along, there's so many questions on a state by state basis as to how that can be a piece of technology can be integrated into a practice in a compliant manner. So that's super important for any business to stay in front of and be aware when they're bringing in new service lines, that they kind of want to filter that decision and make sure that they're covered, and not just from a legal perspective, but also from a business perspective, because we all have our clients that have expensive coat racks, machines they buy, and they don't get put to use because there was no research put into it. It's one of those scaling risks they talk about. I mean, starting to invest in equipment gets expensive fast. Related thing for people to stay in front of is scope of practice. It's a really tricky topic because it does vary by state, and there is so much misinformation out there. I mean, just one very fast example. People will ask, well, can a medical esthetician do X? And I'm like, there's no such thing as a medical esthetician. Legally, that is a person who has an esthetician's license that, from a marketing perspective, wanted to add the word medical to their name so that they could justify doing things they may not be allowed to do in the first place. And so it's like a signal, a beacon to the board saying, I'm doing things I shouldn't be doing. And that's just one little example. I'm not picking on estheticians because they have a tremendously valuable role. And there are ways in some states they can do delegated medical services, but it's maybe a little different than you would think. Just becomes so important. You have the right people doing things they're allowed to be doing. Compensation structure is another one. There's a commission heavy kind of market for how employees in med spas are paid, and there are state laws in some states. Every state has something that impacts your ability to pay or limit on commissions in some states flat out prohibit it as fee splitting. And so it's really important to understand your comp structure and understand the impact of how you decide to set your comp structure will have on recruiting, and thinking through, how do you still recruit and retain talent if you're limited by law on how you can pay them. And then, the two biggies, employment, staying in front of employment laws, staying in front of kind of patient rights in a state. The two biggest risks to any medical practice, med spas included, are patients and employees. And of course, those are the two most necessary things to be successful.
Sure.
You have to have them, but that's the source of risk. And so you have to stay in front of the laws that develop, and there are patient protection laws that get passed in states on an ongoing basis. There's employment laws that get passed on an ongoing basis. And that's a really important way to manage risk.
Thank you for that super in-depth answer. Quick question, little off topic. Multiple times during the show, you've sort of said the phrase state by state. I know you're in Dallas, Texas, but I've never asked you, can you work with anybody across the country? How do you handle that as a law firm? Because I'm sure our listeners, if they want to contact you, are going to want to know the answer to that question.
Yes. Yeah. Byrd is a national firm. So we have worked with clients in all 50 states. We don't have an active client in Hawaii. I would love to come visit you if you're interested. I'll give you a break, audience members, because we need another Hawaii client. But we do have clients in all the states, and a big part of what propelled us nationally was our partnership with Ailm Spa, 10 years ago. Just the part of that is us, providing all the state by state laws to the Ailm Spa members. Those all come from.
Sure. So that's another perfect dovetail into the next question. The 2025 Ailm Spa meeting in Las Vegas is shaping up. Obviously a big event for you. What are some key topics and things people can expect from this year's meeting?
First of all, if you haven't been, I highly encourage you. I am biased, but I think it's the best trade show that I've ever been to. And we go to a lot of trade shows, and I would encourage you to ask someone who has been, and I bet you'll hear the same answer. The energy is phenomenal. And I think it's just because it's a melting pot of different licenses, and they have a place to all come together and relate to each other and learn. And so it's not everybody is the same. Everyone's the same specialty, which those are great conferences as well. But there is a really cool energy where you have different types of doctors, nurses, physician assistants, entrepreneurs, all, trying to figure out how to thrive in this, kind of medical spa world. For the show this year, the Thursday before the show starts, there's kind of a pre-show where Byrd will be involved. There's an M&A summit that's for those who are interested in learning about, how private equity is working in this space and what that could mean to your business. So we're helping put that summit on with a firm called Skytail. They're investment bankers. And then there's a medical spa boot camp, which is an expanded version of what we've been talking about today, where you're really getting into kind of compliance stuff. And then, for the rest of the show, there's going to be compliance, kind of biohacking is a big topic, clinical innovations, there's law, legal playbook, marketing, functional medicine or functional wellness. And then I think there's a cadaver course through AIA on Sunday, which is a sister company of Ailm Spa.
So full agenda. I know that I saw that Judy Kozlicki was promoting that she was going to be speaking there.
Judy will be there.
On the Skytail end of things, Judy was on the show in season 1, but I noticed, and I will be there for sure. So I look forward to that.
Awesome.
And anything else about the meeting that you want to share? Anything exciting about it? Anything takeaways for people who might want to register or thinking about register?
I highly encourage it because it's the education. There's going to be some form of subject matter that can help, a med spa grow in their business. But I really think the connectivity to the industry, and our partner, Alex Tiers, who's the founder of Ailm Spa, he's also a partner at Byrd. he just talks, his vision for AmSpa is to create this, kind of awareness and culture of compliance, because, his belief is that, and we agree, is that that's what can bring the industry down. I mean, when you see the stuff on the news because, someone was doing something really bad and someone got hurt, that has such a massive negative impact on the industry as a whole because of the perception, but even more so how states start to regulate, to overcorrect on those things. And so there's just you can feel the passion that AmSpa has for teaching compliance, not just for the sake of your business, but for the sake of the industry.
Thank you for all that. I really enjoyed having you on the show. Obviously, this is stuff we don't always get to talk about. I also know you're a very busy guy, and you've always seemed to make time for me, so I really appreciate that. Thank you for being on the show. This is the part in the show where I ask you for your Ailm Essential Insight. So one key takeaway that our listeners might be able to take back to their practice and apply that might either solve a problem or save them from a problem?
The number one thing, people don't know what compliance means. Compliance is not stagnant. People think of it as a list that you check off and then you're done. And as we've talked about, it's a moving target. Your business can be compliant one minute and not compliant the next. And so it's so important to adopt it from almost as a culture to your business. And the stakes are this: like, if you're not compliant, it threatens the business to be able to survive. You get your doors shut down. The flip side that people don't talk about, which is the way I like to think about it, is the positive, is that a compliant business actually raises the value of your business. When you start talking about private equity, the first thing they're doing when they're doing due diligence is looking at they're looking at your team and they're looking at your compliance. And so if you have a good team and you've done things the right way, you're going to enhance the value of your business, and it's going to be a more marketable business because it has less risk. That's what buyers are looking for, is they're trying to purchase the least risk. They're going to add value to the least risk to the business stream. And then if there's one thing I'd say to be compliant, if you have a supervising physician involved, do not get into a lender license situation where they're just uninvolved and you're paying them some, few $100s a month and you never see them. They don't even know where you are. The boards will absolutely hammer those businesses when something goes wrong. You have to have an engaged physician.
Yeah, super good takeaways. Some of that is super good takeaways for any business, right? The value of your business boils down to your team and systems and protocols.
Right. Yeah.
Super valuable information. If people want to register for AmSpa, where do they go?
You can go to, there actually is a website for the Medical Spa Show 2025, and that's probably going to be the best. If you go to the AmSpa, the American Medical Spa Association, you can kind of link your way there. But the best thing is just type in Medical Spa Show 2025. I was just going to say it's at the Wynn in Vegas in April.
I'll be there. I'm looking forward to seeing you there. I know that there's a couple shows between now and then that I'm going to see you at, so I look forward to our connection at those meetings as well. Again, I know you're super busy, so thank you for being on the show. Thanks for making the time.
Thanks for having me.